So, this video is all about the country that proudly calls itself the Land of Fire. But did you know that Azerbaijan is actually also an acronym? As it turns out, it stands for astounding, zealous, extraordinary, resourceful, bedazzling, acclaimed, and implicitly just another Nordic. Huh, no wonder they came up with a nickname for themselves. Ah! Shots fired, apparently. Hello everyone, I am Tessellating Hexagons, and, well, at the time of recording this, there are a couple of interesting Eurovision things I could be doing videos about, including a certain junior edition of the contest, or a certain big name giving the 2019 edition of the contest a swerve, but I'm holding out on both of those until I have a little bit more data at my fingertips, since, as you'll recall, this video's actually been up for a month already, unless you're watching this through my Patreon, of course, which you could do. More information in the description and at the end of the video, but I digress. So, that being the case, what can I talk about in the meantime? Well, you've already seen the opening skit of this video, and you've probably also already seen the title too, which may be above or below the video depending on where you're watching this. So there's no point in me beating about the bush here. Today, I'm taking a look at the Land of Fire itself, Azerbaijan. As ever, the best place to start is with the fast facts. First up, their national broadcaster is one ITV, not to be confused with the United Kingdom Independent Broadcasting Company, UKIB, which is known domestically as ITV as well. No, in Azerbaijan's case, it stands for İçtimai Televizya, or İçtimai Television, if you prefer. Either way, it means public television. It was launched in 2005 and joined the EBU in July of 2007. Now, time was, I'd quite confidently tell you that their head of delegation is Tamila Shirinova, because literally all of the sources that I can find point to her being the one to hold that position, apart from one dissenting article that says that she stepped down in 2016, and neither that article nor anywhere else on the internet seems to have any information whatsoever on who stepped up to replace her, if that did indeed even happen in the first place. So, is it really too much to ask that the EBU just publicizes some kind of database of who the current heads of delegations are? So, yeah. All I have to go on is this press conference from the 2018 contest when that year's representative, Aysel, introduced her team, on first-name terms only. I tried.
Yeah, and our delegation from Azerbaijan is Ayaz and Umay.
And of course,
head of
Focus.
And Focus, our great, yes.
Here he is.
Yes, and Alex Panay, our vocal teacher.
Anyway, Azerbaijan made their debut in the very first contest they could after joining the EBU, 2008, bringing the song Day After Day by Elnor Huseynov and Samir Javadzadeh, though they presented themselves as Elnor and Samir, and this is a pattern that we'll see a lot of in Azerbaijan's Eurovision strategy, but I'll come back to that. Their efforts earned them 132 points and an 8th place finish in the grand final, which would be pretty admirable, but that was just the start for the Land of Fire. Just 3 years later, they'd go on to win the contest outright, with Eldar Gasimov and Nigar Jamal, or just El and Nikki, you and me, and the song Running Scared with 221 points, in the face of placing second in its semi-final on the way there. Just goes to show, that can happen. Ever since their debut 10 years ago, Azerbaijan have really captured my interest, and for a number of reasons. Of course, there's the relatively mundane fact that my younger self had never heard of this mysterious country, and I was intrigued by the fact that the flag technically has 4 colours in it, if you count white, when most countries only had 2 or 3. Yeah, for some reason that was one of the main draws of Azerbaijan to me as a child. I really used to be that boring. Technically kinda still am, I digress. But the main draw that kept my attention was Azerbaijan's seeming intentions towards taking a full tour of the Eurovision scoreboard, so to speak. That is to say, in their first 6 entries, they held each one of the top 5 spots, and one top 10 but not top 5 placing. And to my young mind, that just seemed like this country had joined Eurovision already knowing exactly what they were getting into, and almost like an eager tourist, wanting to get the full experience, as it were. Every position on the scoreboard, all the possibilities, and that said to me that eventually they planned on deliberately getting nil points just to say they had. I don't know. Well, to their credit, they have never finished in the same position twice, in the 11 entries they've thus far sent, so that actually might still be their plan yet. I don't know, Azerbaijan moves in mysterious ways, as we'll find out. That being said, something should leap out straight away in my saying that. In their first 6 entries, they took all 5 top 5 placings, albeit not in ascending or descending order, and in 11 tries, they've never held the same final position twice. So, if they got their top 5 placings out of the way early, that would indicate that they're starting to slip, and, well, their recent history actually seems to corroborate that. So that's what I want to look into with this video. Has Azerbaijan lost their spark? Are people over what they can bring to the table? Or is this all one massive coincidence, and are they about to massively bounce back like nothing happened? What's the deal here? Well, we'll just have to see, won't we? As ever, I think it would be wise to start at the beginning, though I hear you. It'd help if I defined when that beginning actually is, since in some of these videos I start with the origins of the country in question outright, rather than with their first ever Eurovision appearance, so it can get a bit confusing. Well, modern-day Azerbaijan declared their independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, and true, the Soviet Union had toyed with ideas of Eurovision participation without ever actually committing to it, but that has absolutely no bearing on Azerbaijan's Eurovision history whatsoever, as far as I can tell anyway, so fear not, we're only delving as far back as 2008, when Azerbaijan burst onto the Eurovision scene for the very first time. Come to think of it, in order to digest the facts a little more easily, I think it would be fair to split the country's history right down the middle, separating their first 6 entries from their most recent 5, or 6 if we include their incumbent representative in the, as of the time of recording, upcoming 2019 contest. This isn't just because that makes it visually pretty for this video by any means, no, it actually serves as a good marker for when their luck seemed to start turning around for the worse. So, beginning with those first 6 entries, what was Azerbaijan doing that earned them a first, a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, and an 8th place finish, with half of those coming second in their semi-final, one of which winning its semi-final, and one straight-up auto-qualifying? The easiest way to finding an answer here would be to look at what these entries might have in common that the later entries might not. It's as good a place to start as any, I suppose. So, of those 6 entries, only 2009 was a fully internal selection, while the rest were some flavour or other of national final, whereas their most recent 5 entries were, with one exception, fully internal. But there's a number of reasons why that doesn't really tell us anything. For one, the internal selection of 2009 led to a 3rd place finish, while the most recent ones have led to much less favourable results. For another, the national finals that took place in those other years weren't quite as straightforward as your standard national selections for most countries. 2008's system saw 6 competing entries across 3 different artists, but with the added caveat that the winner could change their song if they wanted, which they didn't in the end. 2010 was presented like a national final, but was based on 100% jury votes. And all the other national finals from this part of Azeri history took the form of a talent show competition kind of thing, just to find the singer, where the final result was also 100% jury, even if the qualifying heats were 50% televote. So, in one format or another, Azerbaijan's entries have effectively never not been an internal selection as far as the final Eurovision entry that they get out of the other side is concerned. That being the case, the fact that this doesn't tell us anything, in itself tells us something else, that we're thinking about it all wrong. Simply put, their strategy is largely the same thing each year, so for their results to be so strong at first and then dip later, the responsibility for that must be borne by someone other than the delegation themselves. That is to say, their strategy has stayed more or less constant over the years. Get a bit of public input to guide them towards the singer, then take over and produce a song they think the public would want to hear. And for a time, that worked. The fact that it stopped working over time, despite nothing else changing, simply suggests that the delegation started to lose touch with what the Eurovision audience wanted to hear from them. So, with that in place, I think it would make sense to digest their entries over time to see if we can pick up on what that pattern might be. Remember, we're looking for something that remained constant across all of their entries, that was popular in the late 2000s, early 2010s, but that fell out of favour a few years ago. We'll begin then, at the beginning, with their debut entry, Elnur and Samir, who finished 8th with Day After Day. It was a strange combination of pop rock, opera, and traditional Azeri Mugam music, and told the narrative about the clash of good and evil within mankind, of angels and demons, that sort of thing. Presumably, despite its strangeness both visually and aurally, it made a lasting impression on the audience. It's not the sort of stage show you would go forgetting in a hurry. So, Coupled with the inherent appeal of representing a never-before-seen country at the contest, it comes as little surprise that it qualified in hindsight, and that it then impressioned its way into the top 10 thereafter as well. People are more cynical nowadays, so I doubt that sort of entry would yield the same sort of response from the audience of today, but in my mind, this is more of a black sheep in the lineup than it seems. This is the exception rather than the rule, which perhaps is why it quote-unquote only placed 8th, as opposed to the consecutive top 5 finishes Azerbaijan would enjoy in the 5 years that followed. Not to show my hand too early, so to speak, but consider this. Day After Day was composed by one Govha Hasanzadeh, with lyrics by Zara Badalbeli. Conversely, the entries that followed took a slightly different approach. That is to say, Always, Drip Drop, Running Scared, and When the Music Dies were all written by teams consisting largely of Swedish songwriters rather than domestic talent, and they came 3rd, 5th, 1st, and 4th, respectively. I believe I mentioned this in my Sweden retrospective, but Sweden are no strangers to outsourcing their talent to other countries who might want them. It's commonly thought that Sweden's domination of the contest started in 2011 with Erik Saade and Popular in response to their failure to qualify the year before, but in truth, Azerbaijan had beaten them to that domination by a couple of years by using their own strength against them. Then there's 2013. Farid Mammadov's Hold Me, which won its semi-final and then stormed to 2nd place at the end of the voting, was written as a collaboration between Sweden-based Scottish producer John Ballard and Greek dance pop legend Dimitris Kontopoulos, who was already famous by that point for bringing his home country to 7th place in 2009, Belarus to their best ever placing in 2007, and bringing Ukraine to their 2nd consecutive 2nd place in the year in between, with the much celebrated number Shady Lady. True, this wasn't the Swede-domination of previous years, but this was still a highly popularity-driven team. I'm not saying Hold Me was a cynical ploy written entirely for votes, though this was a concept Ballard and Kontopoulos would return to a few years later for another country, but it did have its desired effect of shooting to the top of the scoreboard and garnering critical acclaim in so doing, and, well, to be entirely honest, that's it. We've found our answer. In a way, it's fascinating. Azerbaijan is something of a case study of what Sweden would be like if you took away that psychological element. That is to say, there are times where, perhaps to me as a Brit, it feels like Sweden at Eurovision fares so well, maybe just because of the name and the flag. I mean, look at their jury results in 2018, especially compared to their public results. Azerbaijan proves that given the same music but under a different name and face, it gets stale a lot quicker in the eyes of the same people who are voting. This might sound like I'm throwing shade at one or both countries, but that is not my intention here at all. In truth, as I said, look at the present-day contest. In 2018, Sweden's edition of Melodifestivalen brought in a record low in viewership compared to previous years, and their entry at the contest utterly tanked with the public vote, even placing lower than the UK, who suffered a stage invasion halfway through their televote performance, and we didn't get a subsequent re-performance, so basically Europe didn't get to hear the UK's song. Sweden's stranglehold on Eurovision popularity is beginning to slacken. But beyond that, it's not just Sweden proper. As I said, Kontopoulos and Ballard collaborated on Russia's 2016 entry You Are the Only One, which achieved 3rd place. But their subsequent collaboration, Greece's This Is Love in 2017, fared much worse, finishing in 19th place in the final. True, the following year, Ballard brought Moldova to 10th place in the final, but Kontopoulos wrote for Azerbaijan once more, and that led to the country's first ever failure to qualify. But don't just take my word for it, let's take a look at Azerbaijan's more recent entries as a whole. 2014's Start a Fire was written by a Swedish team and came a disappointing 22nd in the final. In 2015, they brought Elnor Husseinov back with a Swedish written entry and came a respectable 12th. 2016 saw a song that was not only written by a Swedish team, but was, allegedly, an actual rejected entry from that year's Melodifestivalen, and it earned them a 17th place in that year's final. If anything, consider their 2017 entry Skeletons, which placed 14th directly off the back of that, especially with the hindsight that in the year that followed, Azerbaijan would fail to qualify for the first time with a song penned by Kontopoulos and Sandra Bjurman. With their 2017 entry being a middle-of-the-scoreboard peak, flanked on both sides by disappointing results, and with it being a song written by Bjurman alongside Azerbaijan's own homegrown Isa Melikov, one thing becomes rather apparent. That reliance on writers thought of as being popular or populist, whether that's just by being Swedish or by being part of teams that were successful in previous years or whatever, that's no longer effective, and that using local artists, fully representative of the country in question and its musical zeitgeist, is much more preferred in the present day. Azerbaijan sort of demonstrates this on a microcosmic scale, but we have seen it happen elsewhere in the contest too. For instance, remember Thomas Giersen Gustafsson? He used to be a household name at the contest, for better or for worse. He was responsible for Sweden's Euphoria, amongst other things, but in recent years, his successes have waned quite a bit, and the 2018 contest even saw one of his songs fail to qualify for the first time since 2007, before his Eurovision career had properly taken off. And that should come as no surprise. We saw Ralph Siegel rise and fall before him. Trends come and go, and nobody's safe from that. But that then leaves Azerbaijan in something of a curious position, because, well, for one, they do highly prioritise getting good results, and that is admirable, no questions there. I'll quite readily predict that their 2018 failure to qualify will serve as a valuable and useful lesson going forwards. In fact, the delegation probably already fully knows and understands everything that I just explained, but amidst all of this cold, calculated strategizing, there is one question that bothers me somewhat. Is the delegation ashamed to be Azerbaijani? Realistically, there's no reason as to why that should be. Participation at Eurovision is a high honour for anyone, and if you are ashamed of your country, you wouldn't go to Eurovision for your country. But is it just me, or is Azerbaijan's entire Eurovision career built completely around pretending not to be Azerbaijan? Of course, a good few of their entries include elements that do convey the country's culture. Consider their debut entry, consider the instrumentation of the likes of Always and When the Music Dies, consider Start a Fire to an extent, but at the same time, also consider that a lot of their songs were written in consultation with, or just straight up written by, teams from not Azerbaijan with a capital N and a capital A. True, that is an effective way to appeal to other countries' tastes and thus get points from them, but they're sacrificing a huge part of themselves in order to do that, and the most tragic part is, it's not even working for them anymore. What I have in mind when I say this is, well, a number of things. Case study number 1, 2018. Aysel is, by trade, a jazz musician who, by her own admission, readily dabbles in lounge, soul, progressive, and minimalist genres as well, and yet she was slapped with a generic pop song. She speaks fluent English, which was part of the reason why she was selected to sing for her country in the first place, and yet the lyrics to her entry were complete gibberish. In short, it was a piece of hastily manufactured music designed to masquerade as a born and bred piece of Western pop. Unsurprisingly, Europe saw right through it, and though her voice, presence, and catchy-ish tune brought Aysel to 11th place in the semi-final, it wasn't anywhere near the level of proficient required for it to make the same impact as its predecessors, because Europe had heard all of this before at this point. They weren't bedazzled anymore. Pay no attention to the Azerbaijan behind the curtain, etc. And the second point of interest is the question of language, or lack thereof actually. Literally all of Azerbaijan's entries thus far have been presented, without exception and without hesitation, in English, and usually of as good as fluent quality at that. This has kept up to so much of an extent that the first use of the Azeri language in a Eurovision song came in 2012 as part of the Bulgarian entry. Of course, in itself, that's nothing to be ashamed about. If they'd rather present their songs in English, more power to them. After all, it wasn't until 2018 that both Georgia and Armenia, their two fellow Caucasian countries at the contest, presented songs fully in their native languages for the first time, though both countries had teased small amounts of their languages in previous entries, 2012 for Georgia and 2007, 8 and 9 for Armenia, but still. With Azerbaijan, it almost feels like they're embarrassed or reluctant or something about the prospect of breaking form here, especially considering that they had originally intended for their 2018 entry to be presented in the language of Azerbaijan, as several media outlets reported, but then when Cross My Heart was released, it was fully and remorselessly in English once again. What really seals the deal and what makes me think that, though, is their presence at Junior Eurovision. Unlike the present-day adult contest, Junior Eurovision still has a rule that stipulates that all entries must be performed at least 75% or so in the native language of the country it represents. Azerbaijan's debut entry, Girls and Boys Dünya Sınındır, was originally presented fully in English without the subtitle, and they were adamant that that was the version they wanted to bring to the contest, until the EBU categorically told them they had to rewrite or face disqualification. And both of their junior entries since then have been presented with fully English titles and featuring English lyrics alongside the required amount of the Azeri language. I could be grossly misreading the situation here, but it really feels like they view westernization as being synonymous with being successful, and that success should come as their top priority at the expense of anything and everything else. And that hurts to see, especially when applied to the junior contest at the same time. And so the time comes for me to assign Azerbaijan a grade for their efforts, and I freely concede it doesn't come easily. This video essay might well come across like one big, long, protracted rant about them not being themselves enough, or about Sweden again, or something like that, and that isn't my intention here. The truth is, Azerbaijan are a routine tour de force at Eurovision, and no amount of present-day wobbling in popularity can erase their earlier glory days, just as long as they remember that unless they shake things up and fast, those glory days will remain in the past. And so, for that reason, I'm inclined to award Azerbaijan a rank B. But be forewarned, that's a low B. One more year of trying the same old strategy and not having it pay off, and that's inclined to slip down to a C. I'm not even going to make any bones about that, because I believe that the Azerbaijani delegation are truly intelligent people. I think they already know all of this, and they already know what to do and what not to do in the near future. I trust that they won't keep making the same mistakes. Of course, that does remain to be seen, but of all the countries in the contest, I highly doubt that Azerbaijan will fade into obscurity in the immediate future. They're smarter than that, and they love Eurovision. That's why they make such a great effort to do well each year, whether it works or not. That's why they put so much money towards hosting it in 2012. They even threw their hat into the ring to host the ill-fated third edition of the Eurovision Dance Contest in Baku. So, with all of that in mind, here's hoping that the Land of Fire won't be going down in flames anytime soon. In the meantime, all that remains for me to do is shout out, as ever, to the wonderful, lovely people who support me on patreon.com/TessHex, whose support and love help this video come into existence at all. You've probably heard this speech entirely too many times already, but the offer is still there. Pledge $1 per video to see these video essays a month before anyone else, with no ads, and pledge more to unlock a load of other glorious prize perk things. If that's something you would like to pursue, it's your choice. Consider it as you will. For now, I have been, and will continue to be, Tessellating Hexagons, and I do hope you can join me in whichever video of mine appeals to you next. See you then.